Hello everyone. I believe it was sophomore year. The first and only book I actually paid attention to in English class was Hatchet. And even then I zoned out close to the end. For the last 3 years of school, what we basically did in that class was just read through books and answer questions. And thank Jesus we went over the sheet together after a while, cause I'd be damned if I was supposed to remember that crap on my own. I remember this quite well, but if the teacher noticed that some student wasn't paying attention to the book, sometimes she'd be like, at least pretend like you're reading. But the thing is though, she would also have somebody read the book to us on the speakers. And like during my final year, when I wasn't looking at the book, she seemed to have gotten irritated. But it's like, can I pretend like I'm listening instead? I'm not going to remember this shit either way, so that's basically what I'm doing. So yeah, I didn't bother. I was basically just laying on the floor. Anyway, Hatchet. I kind of enjoyed the premise. I mean, I ain't no novel guy, but yeah, the concept was neat, I suppose. It's one of them survival novels, and I don't mean the I Survive series with like 8 million entries. The premise is basically a kid goes flying on an airplane with some guy, and said guy has a heart attack or something, dies, and then the plane goes crashing into the lake that's in the forest, and the kid is stuck there for a while. I actually wondered how often this happens in real life. I know it's happened before, but apparently more often than I would have assumed. And it may not necessarily come from a plane crashing, it may just be like, well, if you're hiking in the middle of butt hell nowhere, and you fall behind and lose track of your team, this sort of scenario would occur. So yeah, it probably happens quite a bit. I mean, no cell service, you can't call for help, so you're basically pissed out of luck. And stuff like that is kind of the reason why I don't really camp or travel very far or often. I prefer to stay as close to my house as possible. I read part of Anne Frank for school one time, which in theory is kind of similar to Hatchet. Like, it's also about people trying to survive, except it's not quite the same scenario. And I made a video years ago that no longer exists about how much the Anne Frank book sucks, and my mom wasn't too happy about that. Let me clarify, I agree it is pretty sad what they had to go through for like 2 years, and they died in the end anyway. That shit is rough. So yeah, I do agree. But the book itself, though, is boring. And being honest here, I still dislike it just as much as I did back then. But to be fair, it is a pretty important part of history, and if you like reading the book, then all power to you. I just don't like reading it myself. But that's besides the point. We're talking about Hatchet. I don't really remember that much of the book, but it's interesting to me that the title of the novel is named after one of the things that the kid creates. Like, this book could have been called Bow or Spear, but they went with Hatchet, which I think I like the most. In 10th grade, a teacher put on a movie based off the novel after we were done reading it. It was called A Cry in the Wild. It might have been the only option we had film-wise, because she's probably not going to be showing the R-rated version in class from 2006. But I don't know, I mean, A Cry in the Wild is from 1990, and it's not exactly what I'd call good. Like, the acting has loads of room for improvement. I will show you a few scenes of the movie just so you can see how laughable it really is. For whatever reason, the whole thing is on YouTube, but at least as of now. God knows when it's going to get striked down, but let's take a peek.
You see down there? One day I fished that lake with a lady named Hattie. I had one hell of a time, I can tell you.
What's its name?
Doesn't have a name. There's too many of them to name. It's just a lake.
I mean, we name stars, right? And there's too many of those to name off. But I guess stars are a bit more important than, like, small bodies of water. That would kind of be like, say, if you named all the puddles that were in your backyard after it had rained really hard. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And you know, this is kind of unrelated, but let me just get this out of the way real quick. NASA probably has an archive of stars, like a whole, like, thousands and thousands and thousands of stars on a list that they have found, but they have not named. I would not be surprised if they had something like that. But anyway, so I do believe there was a scene where the kid is having a dream of some memory he had, and just take a look. What? Yeah, Dad's going to work and I'm never gonna see him again. This is terrible! God, okay, I gotta keep a straight face for the rest of this video. When that scene played, half the class just erupts with laughter. It makes 0 sense. Anyway, we gotta move past that, because if I don't, I'm gonna be laughing forever. Whew. Okay, so another part of the movie, I believe, if I remember correctly, and this was probably in the book as well, I don't know, because in movies they just sometimes add crap, but I think there was like a storm or something, and it damaged some of his fort that he was using to sleep in, and so the kid goes ape crap and just like throws rocks and stuff at it, and a classmate who was sitting right next to me, he was like, "You're doing more damage than the storm did," and it's like, no shit, right? The movie's funny, but for all the wrong reasons, and I think you would get more enjoyment of just watching my video on the book than watch the movie of the book. And yeah, it is pretty important to know what to do whenever you get lost in the woods. So I have made a list for myself on how to survive. Step number 1, I don't. Sorry, but unless somebody finds me quickly, I'm not gonna last probably even 2 days out there. My ass is grass. And you know what? Speaking of grass, I kind of wondered something a while back. If anyone were to accidentally stumble into something like this out in the wild, couldn't they just eat like dirt or leaves in order to live if they didn't know how to hunt animals? My dad was saying that dirt does not have the right kind of fuel to power your body the same way meat does. Like, just eating a bunch of dirt not only would be gross, but it would not really have any effect. So it wouldn't work. Well then, I'm damned.